Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third session of the day. My name is Angela Johnson, and I will be chairing a couple of panel discussions around net zero transport delivery now. I'm delighted I'm here. I work for Ricardo. I'm also proud to be a board member of Zemo Partnership. Great to be with you for this today, although had I realised that I'd be getting the post-lunch session and be following Lord Deben, I might have given a different answer. But there we go, it is what it is. I have with me a great panel and looking forward to the discussion. So I have Catherine Bowen from BVRLA, I have Rebecca Kite from CPT, the Confederation of Passenger Transport, and Ollie Bradshaw from Certas Energy. I'd just like to remind everybody as well that we've got the Mentimeter piece. So if you would like to register, log into that using the information here or from the QR code on your programme, please share your views with us on some of the topics that we're talking about today. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off with the first panel with my guests. And what I'd really like to do is, first of all, just take a couple of minutes with each of the panel members and give them an opportunity to sort of outline their top-line perspectives on the challenges that are facing their particular sector and industry in terms of delivering decarbonisation. So I'd like to welcome Catherine to start.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So the British Vehicle Rental and Leasing Association, we're a trade association that represents rental, leasing and fleet management sector. We have around 1,000 members and they have a combined fleet of 4 million vehicles. So 1 in 10 cars, 1 in 5 vans and 1 in 5 trucks on the UK roads will be owned by a BVRLA member. Fleets are very much leading the transition. And we can see that where there are strong incentives, such as benefit in kind taxation, this has led to growth. And we heard earlier about the growth in salary sacrifice, but also in people opting for a company car that might not have ordinarily have chosen an electric vehicle. But where we don't see incentives, this is where we're definitely seeing a slowing of demand. So this very much leads to a mixed picture with certain fleet segments really facing some challenges. The first is around electric vans. So operators are really facing some strong headwinds. There are a number of factors at play in terms of the cost of the vehicle, the availability and its ability to meet all different use case needs, the charging infrastructure, which has often been built for cars, so in a lot of cases inaccessible for vans, and then also the cost of charging, where we've got fleet operators who are heavily reliant on the public charging network. So I think with all of those factors at play, unless we see these issues addressed, then we will continue to see that transition stall outside of the very, very largest fleets. The second area of challenge is around the rental sector. So they face some very unique challenges, trying to convert customers who don't necessarily have the confidence or are convinced at this point to take an electric vehicle as a challenge, but they also face some unique challenges in terms of trying to put infrastructure in at their rental branches, particularly when they're based at an airport. So a number of factors there. And I think also with rental, the ability to convert people and change behaviours is often overlooked. So it's not always about getting everybody into an electric vehicle, but actually rental has a key role to play in changing behaviour and get people to use vehicles in a slightly different way through both car clubs and vehicle rental. And I know that's something that Claire mentioned when she opened earlier today, which was very welcome. And then the final area is around the used BEV market. So we've continued to see growing supply of vehicles coming onto the second-hand market, and prices have slumped. And whilst it may look very attractive that we have really affordable second-hand vehicles, because of the intrinsic link between new and used, this is unsustainable in the long term. So we do need to see some support in the used market. So I think, yeah, in summary, just like to see more support to grow that demand in both the new and the used market, and in a regulatory environment that sort of supports everybody make that transition.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think you raised the important point as well, is that you've got many different use cases within that segment from a rental and leasing perspective. So there are different solutions that maybe will support that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I'd like to move next to Rebecca. So please.
Great, thank you. So I'm from the Confederation of Passenger Transport. We are a trade organisation and we represent the interests of the bus and coach sector. Our membership includes both small and large bus and coach operators, but also suppliers to the industry as well and manufacturers. And our job is to support them and ensure that they are able to deliver the best services possible for their passengers in a safe and compliant way. So I've recently moved across to our membership team. But I used to be our lead on zero emissions, and I did a lot of work with our zero emission coach task force and our zero emission rural bus task force. Obviously, bus and coach are green, sustainable travel options already, but members completely appreciate and are willing to, they know they need to transition to zero emission. So we established both task forces to try and be proactive in this space, to get ahead of the challenges, but also try and identify what was needed to overcome them. So the challenges for coach, firstly, the range. So we know we've got some really great electric coaches out there at the moment, but the problem is that the range doesn't quite deliver for all of the services that coaches deliver. So it's very good for home to school, but quite often coach operators will deliver multiple services in a day. So the range needs to be able to do home to school, some private hire jobs, and then home to school again, and the range isn't quite there. Also, they cost a lot of money, and coach at the moment haven't had any kind of supportive funding. There's also been no kind of funding put into kind of trial these vehicles as well, to try and give that confidence and that certainty over how they operate. So that given that the range currently doesn't deliver all the services it needs to as well, that just a further challenge, makes a challenge for the business case. And then there's also the challenge around infrastructure. So they're going to need depot charging as well as on the road, and quite often your depots will be limited space-wise or size-wise. You've got the added cost, and of course you've got to then have the infrastructure across the strategic network as well. And for buses are further along the journey. They've got zero emission, they've got electric and they've got hydrogen solutions. However, they've still got the challenges there. They still cost a lot of money to run, and the uplift in green BSOG was very, very welcome. However, it's not quite enough to make those services and deliver all of them, make them business case for them. Also, we've got problems again with the infrastructure. There really needs to be kind of an overhaul of the connections to the grid. The process needs to be streamlined. Operators are coming across loads of kind of barriers and challenges. And then, of course, hydrogen as well. There's not the process in place for the right certification for these sites. We know that we've got a liquid hydrogen site, but they are having trouble getting that signed off because there just isn't the kind of capacity there to do that yet. And of course, we've got further challenges with our rural. Rural is similar to coaches in their challenges in that the range isn't quite there with the technology available. They've got issues with them accessing infrastructure. Not all of them have depots, so not all of them be able to put their infrastructure in. So it's all very challenging. And of course, the one that overarches all of this is we need to get more people on board. We need more people on buses and coaches to be able to reinvest in them and keep delivering better services.
No, thank you, Rebecca. And I think you highlight, again, the differences between within bus itself, the rural to the urban. Coach is a completely different model. We've talked a lot today about electric. We've talked a bit more about hydrogen, but now that leads me nicely, before I come back and there's some more questions I really want to ask you about fuels and sustainable fuels, drop-in fuels. And I'd just like Ollie to talk a little bit more from a fuel perspective as well.
Yeah, I'm Ollie, so representing Certas Energy, who are obviously a headline sponsor here. So firstly, I recognise that most of the conversation here has been about EV and electrification. So obviously I'm coming from a liquid renewables and specifically hydrotreated vegetable oil background. There needs to be, I think it's interesting firstly to note that the only mention of biofuels and HVO was in the panel previous to lunch. That's the first sort of time that we've heard that in this in this summit. So what I'm here today is to talk about HVO and the benefits of how it is an immediate drop-in solution to decarbonisation. So particularly heavy goods vehicles, freight, marine, air, agriculture, etc., where that timescale for fleet life cycle is 10, 15 years. Perhaps you might not want to invest immediately in electrification, and it's also been mentioned the cost of doing so. So basically, Certas, to make it clear, has and is investing in electric vehicles, photovoltaic and heat pumps, but also recognises that HVO is necessary as a complementary transition to decarbonisation. And as I said, it offers that immediate decarbonisation without the upfront investment of new fleets, etc., new infrastructure. By drop-in solution, it means it's miscible within the tank itself, within a storage tank, and it can be blended to any degree with fossil diesel. So there's no need to sort of physically segregate that fuel from your existing fuel source. And I would also say that whilst it hasn't been mentioned much today in this summit, HVO is growing exponentially. So in 2022, the UK consumption was about 200 million litres. And with this year's current trajectory, we're looking at about 600 million litres in 2024. European-wide, I know today's focus about UK, but European-wide, we're expected, or Argus Media expects, 35 billion litres of consumption by 2035, and that's up from 7 billion in 2023. So yeah, I'll just end there for now.
Brilliant. No, thank you. And I'll come back on to the fuels piece. But first of all, I just want to move back to Catherine. And you've talked about some of the challenges in the fleet sector, particularly with rental and the uptake and the change in behaviours required from an EV perspective. What sort of specific things does the fleet sector really need to drive the transition to decarbonise?
I suppose it depends on the different segment. But from a rental perspective, it is being recognised for that role that they can play. And then it's not just converting everybody into an electric vehicle, but actually changing that behaviour. We found that rental really complements other forms of transport. So people do use public transport more, they walk, they cycle, but quite often the car just gets demonised. And then it's no cars at all, whereas there is a role if it's used intelligently. So I think on that side, we've got all sorts of asks on the electric van side. The plug-in grant needs to remain. We're just not at the point in the transition where we want to see that go just yet, and that's due to go in March next year, so we need to see that retained. Things around charging, and Rebecca mentioned some of the issues with connections, but also the costs of public charging as well, and that whole point around accessibility. So something we'd really like to see there is local authorities engaging a lot more with the fleet community. We do a piece of research that looks at how much the local authorities are engaging with fleet, and it's still over 60% of local authorities are not engaging with the fleet community. So it's really important that we get that engagement, and they know not just to put in the numbers of charge points, but we have the right types of chargers in the right places for all vehicle types and all users. And then on the used BEV side, I think it is just how can we drive demand to make people want new and second-hand electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, thank you. And coming back to yourself, Rebecca, we heard this morning from Simon Lightwood MP that the government is focused on growing bus services, and that buses are at the heart of the integrated transport plan. So, from your perspective, we talked about having electric buses, we've talked about fuel cell and hydrogen. How do we accelerate the rates of introduction of zero-emission buses? We're finding it easier to tackle it from an urban perspective. I'm blessed to be living down on the south coast, and Brighton and Hove buses are quite advanced in what they're doing. We've got fuel cell buses, we've got hydrogen buses. I use the buses quite a lot for travelling around. It's convenient, but I'm in a location where that's well served. So what can we do to sort of bring the rest of the environment along with us?
It kind of builds on the points that Catherine made around the local authorities need to be engaging with the fleets. One of the things we identified that would help with both coach and rural bus is developing these kind of local transport energy like forums or something where it brings together everyone, because it's not just going to be coach or bus, it's going to be vans, it's going to be local authority vehicles, HGV, anything that needs to go to a rural area will need to be brought in eventually on a zero emission vehicle. So it's about identifying the demand, identifying what resources you've got, what space you've got, making sure that you're having these discussions with everyone and bringing everyone along together, and making sure that buses and coaches as well are in the centre of any planning, any like new developments, any new road developments or any road layouts and stuff, making sure that, you know, coach and bus are being thought about so it makes them easier to access areas, but also you can then encourage more people to transport and it's about making it the first choice, the easier, the most convenient choice.
And we heard this morning, you know, from Claire and from the panel just before lunch about that multi-path approach to decarbonise. You know, Catherine, you talked about 4 million vehicles on the road just from your members. So there is an opportunity to support and do something with the current fleet, and that's the sort of role that drop-in fuels that Ollie is talking about can support. So what do your members and organisations think about the role of drop-in fuels, and are they embracing that as one of the pathways to support the decarbonisation challenge? Because it takes a long time, doesn't it, to replace the fleet with all new electric vehicles. Yes. for that to come through and evolve.
Is that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Sorry.
Yes, no, absolutely. We are supportive of the use of drop-in fuels and alternative fuels, and anything really that helps our operators to decarbonise their fleet and operate even cleaner vehicles. One of the things that the coach working group was really supportive of was the use of HVO. We had a study that showed that it was between 90 and 99% reduction. They did a study where it showed that it was really easy to operate, and because it dropped straight in, it was really convenient. But the problem is the cost. It needs to be kind of incentivised in a way. And of course, we know that it's limited supply as well, but we are supportive of anything like that would enable operators to continue operating their fleet that they have, but in a greener way.
Yeah. Ollie, would you like to respond to that?
Just to pick up on a couple of things there. So obviously, cost has been prohibitive of HVO in particular. We have, however, seen the differential between diesel and HVO has closed to a gap that we haven't seen, or I certainly haven't seen in 4 or 5 years that I've worked in renewable fuels. So the cost is certainly coming down, and that is due to various different factors. One of which is there is more and more availability coming online. So with legislation such as the RTFO in the UK that sets out blending mandates per year, and we know what those are going to be 5-10 years ahead, and that allows investment into bio refining capacity. Similarly, in Europe, we've got the Renewable Energy Directive. So similarly, you've got the large oil companies that are converting existing fossil refineries into bio capacity, or just building entirely new refining capacity altogether. So there is a lot more supply coming online now, which is affecting the price, and there is a lot more coming online in the future because that investment is in place. A lot of people sort of mentioned that, you know, there's only so much used cooking oil out there, and that is obviously true. And because that tends to be the main feedstock that people like to throw around, although feedstocks included in HVO are not constrained to used cooking oil. You've got brown grease, you've got animal fats, you've got spent bleach earth, you've got other waste materials that go into HVO. Certas as well is also supporting and encouraging the development of new feedstock pathways, so ones that don't exist now, recognising that as more and more demand comes online, we're going to need more and more feedstocks to come. So stuff like municipal solid waste, so that's basically the kind of material that we would normally put into a landfill site and burn. Through pyrolysis and various other reactions, we can turn that into a renewable diesel. At that point, it's not HVO as such, but it is a renewable diesel. Also lignocellulosic materials, so that's basically wood waste and wood chips. So the point there being that there is plenty of supply now, and there is going to be more and more coming online in the next 5, 10 years, up to sort of 15 years. I think the trajectory increases exponentially up to 2035, and at that point we kind of see the supply and demand of HVO renewable diesel kind of plateau. So we see HVO as a short to medium term solution. As I said, that's complementary to the decarbonisation of the road fleet, etc. But obviously we're focusing on the harder to decarbonise sectors such as HGVs, freight, rail, etc.
You answered my next question, Ollie. I was going to ask you, which are the best applications do you think for those renewable fuels, and clearly hard to electrify solutions. We talked about HGVs and hydrogen potentially being one of the options, but for existing fleet.
So road vehicles, probably, I think it's already been mentioned in one of the previous panels. It's a no-brainer to electrify road vehicles. However, your heavy goods vehicles, your agricultural vehicles, any heavy duty plant machinery, etc., where the battery capabilities are not necessarily there, won't be there for maybe 10, 15 years, they are the sectors in which HVO and renewable diesel is, perfect for.
Brilliant, thank you. What I'd like to do now is just open up the floor for any questions that we have from our audience. And we've got one right over in the corner there, the gentleman there with his hand up. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. Ian Smith, I'm from Motorsport UK. I think we did have a reference to sustainable fuel earlier. I think Claire mentioned the international assurance scheme, which reassured me a little bit that we were going to talk about this today, so that's great. But question for Ollie. You mentioned the renewable transport fuels obligation. Does that go far enough in terms of inspiring confidence for investment in the industry? And assuming that it might not, what policy changes are Certas lobbying for to maximise confidence and investment to drive that sector of the industry forward, recognising that it does give us a real short-term opportunity, whilst all of the other things that we've talked about today, recognising the systems thinking and hydrogen, the opportunities and the challenges, and electrification being a really good solution, they're all a long way away. So what can we do in the meantime?
So I mean, to start with, I'd say the RTFO is, whilst it's not perfect, but it's doing what it's designed to do. So I think currently, off the top of my head, we're about 14% blending obligation in 2024. There's 30 billion litres of diesel consumed in the UK each year. It's not easy to, convert that amount of volume immediately. So it has to get ratcheted up year on year at a sort of a significant but also achievable rate. The RTFO also subsidises HVO, so we talked about costs. So HVO that is produced from waste and residue derived feedstocks receives 2 RTFCs. So that's the Renewable Transport Fuel Certificate. So that's part of the RTFO's subsidy, if you like. I don't think they like it being called a subsidy, but a mechanism that helps to reduce the price of HVO. In terms of policy that Certas is supporting, we're always keen to support and lead educational collaborations with industry partners. So we've been on various different panels before with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, Sustainable Logistics Forum, all these kind of people. In terms of policy, there was talk about reducing the duty rate on renewable diesel and HVO. Similar to in Republic of Ireland, there's a carbon component where they have an A and a B component to their fuel duty, which allows them to increase on fossil diesel whilst keeping renewable diesel at the same rate. Whilst I'm not sure how far that has got, but I know that has been lobbied before. In terms of policy, I think it's something that we're sort of very open to, but not necessarily fully engaged in changing the policy as it is right now.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, there's the gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Martin Flack from Benneman. Picking up on Catherine's comment about the residual value on the leasing vehicles being so poor, and picking up on Rebecca's comment about the challenges to go out into the rural areas for buses, how do we see that transition evolving? The normal right way with a bus, for example, would be it has a first life of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the city, and then where I live in Herefordshire, they're probably 10, 12, 15-year-old buses. They're all empty, but that's another discussion, not for today. But the challenge is going to be, how do you improve the point of view of Catherine to get the residual value up and yet encourage the rural second life people to take that vehicle?
I mean, from our perspective, we launched a used BEV campaign a few weeks ago, and it is really about how can we instill confidence for people to take a used battery electric vehicle. So we want to see action on information. So that's things like, more information on battery health. We know that the government's been working on a global technical regulation. I think we spoke earlier in one of the panels about giving people confidence that the batteries aren't just gonna die. Intervention, so grants and VAT that's cut for used BEVs, and then wider support. So can we see things like benefit in kind on used battery electric vehicles? But I think we'll start to see things like second-hand leasing and that becoming second-hand salary sacrifice. So we'll start to see a lot more of that coming through. But then I also think, back to the battery point, we need to look at the longevity in the battery. So beyond the vehicle, particularly when we look at things like HGVs, how much longer will that battery go on for, and can it be used in other ways? So I think there's definitely a lot of things to explore there.
Brilliant. Did you have a point there, Rebecca?
Yeah, I guess it's difficult at the moment, I guess, for rural, because the range of the current electric batteries don't do what they need to for the rural services, which is why, we could be like retrofit and like drop-in fuels and things could help bridge the transition for those kind of vehicles. But you're right, they do tend to be the older vehicles that are put on those routes, and it's a shame that they're empty as well. This is what we need to be doing as well. If we can get more people on board, you then create the sustainable business model to then be able to reinvest. So it needs to be bigger than just focusing on the vehicles. It needs to be that engagement at a local level as well, working with authorities, and how do we change the perception of bus, and how do we make sure that they are moving people around where they need to go.
Yeah, that modal shift is a whole nother question, isn't it? But I think we're coming towards the end of time. So what I'd just like to do is to ask my panel, can you give us sort of, I know it's going to be hard to just ask for one, maybe two if you're quick, one or two policy changes that we will need to absolutely maximise the uptake and optimise the CO2 emissions reductions in your sectors. So Catherine, I'll start with you.
I think it's back to that confidence point. We need to give people confidence that they can adopt electric vehicles and make some of these new products much widely. You're lucky if you can get salary sacrifice, but if things like used salary sacrifice schemes start to come out and we do get what we're asking for and see broader support, then let's make that well known and get that support for both the new and the used market.
Brilliant, thank you. Rebecca.
I'm going to do two. I'm going to do one for coach, one for bus.
That's fine. I'll allow that. That's fine.
I guess for coach, the main policy ask is we need a plan. We need a direction. We've had a call for evidence a couple of years ago and nothing else really. There's been no support. There's been no funding for trials. So it's please just give us a plan, and the operators are willing to transition. They just need direction. And for buses, make sure they're included in planning. Make sure they're the centre of anything. And by making sure you've got the depots where they're needed, you can start putting the infrastructure in. You can start building that demand and change the perception of buses.
Brilliant, thank you. And from your perspective, from a fuels perspective?
Yeah, I would say support in this, not necessarily in the financial sense, support in the sense of exposure and pushing forward renewable fuels as an alternative and immediate way of decarbonisation. There is a lot of product misinformation, I would say, regarding HVO and renewable diesel. So being able to address that, people have a lot of preconceived ideas about how it's made, where it's come from, the impact of producing it. So kind of, support in the sense of promoting that as a viable solution to decarbonisation, and educating people and potential consumer base as to how it's made and the sustainability attributes of renewable diesel.